The day I found my first hole was the day my best friend came back from the dead. We were in high school and stupid. Jake was his name, and we liked to go out to this old abandoned house in the woods after school just to screw around. We would do stupid teenage things. It was a pretty big place, to be honest. It was a 2-story house with a basement, or 3 stories if you counted the small attic above it. The story is supposed to go that an old woman was building the house years and years ago in order to get away from city life, but for some reason she just never finished it. She probably died. Anyway, the house was pretty close to completion when she stopped. But nobody bothered to finish it, and now it just sits there, rotting away. So Jake and I would go to the house, just screw around, scare each other, or explore the place, whatever we felt like. Usually we were careful, or lucky, but nothing ever happened to make us worry. Then the floorboards broke under Jake's feet when we were exploring the 2nd floor, and he fell. I never realized how bad the condition of the house must have been, because when he hit the 1st floor, that broke too, and he fell into the basement. I ran down and looked through the broken hole in the 1st floor. It was dark, but we usually had the foresight to bring flashlights, so I shined a light on him. And I'll never forget what I saw. One of the boards or something must have fallen at just the right angle. That when Jake hit the ground, it pierced right through his stomach like a spear. I could see him shift and try to grab at it. Even hear him gurgle, and then he stopped. He was dead. I was sure of it. Our stupidity had gotten him killed. I was in shock. I didn't know what to do, so I just ran. I ran out of the house and I left him there. It was about evening when I got home and I went straight to my room. I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't stop for anything. I just wanted to curl up and try to forget that scene. My parents tried to talk to me, but I feigned sleep and they just went on. Later that night, we got a call from Jake's parents asking where he was. They actually woke me up for that one, and I said I had no idea. The usual, well, if you see him, please let us know, came afterward, and I just nodded before I went back to sleep. The next day, I had school, and I went through the morning ritual in a bit of a trance. I didn't want to go, but I couldn't stay home. I was pretty sure Jake's parents already suspected something of me. So I went. School was just like usual. People screwing around in the morning and talking. I went up to my normal group of friends that I hung out with before the first bell rang, and my heart stopped. was Jake. He stood there, just laughing, being his normal self. When he saw me, he looked over and grinned before coming over. He made a joke, but I didn't hear it. I just continued to stare. "Hey, you okay?" he asked me, starting to get concerned. "Are you okay?" And was all I could muster back. "Well, yeah, why wouldn't I be?" He laughed a bit, but gave me a weird look. You don't know anything?" I tried to phrase it as delicately as possible. I didn't want anyone else knowing, but I figured that should be enough to clue him in. If it did, he didn't show it. "Know anything of what?" he responded. And then the bell rang. He said bye and gave me a weird look before heading off to class. I just stared after in shock. Why was he here? I saw him die. At the very least, he should be in the hospital, but he was fine. I went to class, but I couldn't concentrate. I just kept thinking about Jake and how he should be dead. I kept trying to think of how he could have survived, but I just couldn't fill this strange hole of a mystery. After class, I decided I'd check out the house. Jake met me after school and asked if I still wanted to hang out. I told him I wasn't feeling well and we'd catch up tomorrow. He seemed to accept that and moved off. It's not like I wasn't excited my friend was back, but looking at him made something in me cringe. He shouldn't be alive. He should not be here. I saw him. So I went to the house that afternoon, alone. When I walked in, I could feel something. It was strange, but familiar. It was the same feeling I got when I looked at Jake. That something wasn't right, and it was just off. However, here it felt like a lingering feeling, not this fresh "what the hell" I got when I saw my friend. I stepped forward and looked down. Sure enough, there was the damn hole he fell through. I let out a sigh of relief and bent over. So I wasn't crazy. I slipped out my usual flashlight and shone it down into the hole. Yes, there was the wreck I saw him land on. Just no Jake. Did he get free? Did he magically regenerate or something? I shone my flashlight up to look towards the hole in the second floor. It wasn't there. My breath caught in my throat and I began to frantically shine my light onto the ceiling. Where was it? I should be right above that damn hole in the floor, but nothing. I bolted up the stairs and sure enough, there was nothing on the floor where he fell. Nothing. Something was wrong. Really wrong. I wandered back down to the first hole and peeked down into it. I'm sure that was the moment that solidified my fate. If I had just ignored it, moved on, and been plain happy that my Jake was back, I might have been able to continue life as usual. But that moment, I saw something. Just a flash of something black, blacker than the darkness beyond my flashlight's range, shift and fly out of sight. I gasped and stumbled back, breathing heavily. I know I should have run, but my curiosity took hold, and my logical side said it was just some animal or trick of the light. So I swallowed my fear and I leaned over to peek again. I didn't see that flash of black again, but I did notice something. The boards and wreckage underneath the hole were gone. With that note, I knew something was wrong. Nobody can clean up something like this mess in a blink of an eye. I bolted. I ran out of that house and through the forest, swearing up and down that something was chasing me. I had a feeling that there was something out there. But now I know that it was simply watching me. For now. I ran home and slammed the door shut behind me before I leapt into my bed. My body curled up and I just lay there, trying to comprehend what was going on. It took me a while, but I finally drew myself out of bed. I had to figure out what was going on, but like hell, I was going back to that damn house. Not if some monster was in it. So I did what any teenager would do. I went to the internet and researched. It was slow, and I didn't have a lot of luck at first. Looking up paranormal just got weird pictures and stories. Friend comes back from the dead got me a lot of zombie stuff. Missing time seemed to get a little more info. A lot of it was around aliens, but a few of the stories piqued my interest. Like, something crazy seemed to happen, like a car crash or an accident. And then, suddenly, there's a time jump, and things seem to be okay, like nothing ever happened. There was one post on a missing time board that seemed to draw my attention, however. It was titled Plot Holes and was only posted a couple of days ago. I curiously clicked it. Everyone seemed to speculate what caused the whole missing time thing. A lot of the time it was aliens or dimensional whatever. This guy, however, acted like he knew for a fact. And his reason was the most bizarre of them all. He started by telling a similar story. In a nutshell, his wife was killed in a household accident when part of their house caved in during a storm. While trying to get to her, he was knocked out by some other debris. When he came to, he was sitting in the living room and his wife was trying to wake him up. The house was fine, no sign of disaster, and she was alive. He was ecstatic, but described a strange feeling, like he'd figured out something he shouldn't have, and that his wife shouldn't be there. Like my feeling I got with Jake. Over time, he couldn't be around her. It was just too strange. So he left. He went on the road, taking what money he had and doing weird little jobs here and there, while staying in motels. While he went, he began to research. It took a great amount of time, but he found some others with similar experiences. Most of them just described it as a miracle and moved on with their lives. Others couldn't shake the feeling. All of them described the same sort of thing. Some event should have caused something to happen. A person would die or some landmark would be destroyed only to have it miraculously come back later. So what was going on? The author was at a standstill until he came across something. While researching people who shouldn't be alive, he came across a book review. Apparently it was the latest book in the series, and in it, a side character saves the day by fighting off a bunch of enemies for the heroes. However, in the previous book, written by a different author, that character had been killed. So this character couldn't have come back to save the day. But if he didn't, the main characters would have died. The reviewer said it was one of the worst plot holes he'd ever seen. That got the forum author and me thinking. He said he'd post again after he'd experimented a bit, and I didn't blame him. I had a few things I wanted to experiment with as well. Nevertheless, I dropped him a message saying I read his post, and that something similar happened to me, then called it an early night. I had to be extremely alert if I was going to try to look for the signs I wanted to find. The next morning, I woke up and started my first attempt at looking for plot holes. I know how crazy that sounded, but something seemed to click after reading that review. Someone should have died, but that was ignored so he could go on and do something of significance later. It sounded so familiar. The first few days I didn't notice anything except for that weird feeling around Jake. Nobody else seemed to have it. The third day was when I noticed my first plot hole. It was minor. It was the most minor of details, but it was there. One of the girls in my class went from wearing a skirt to a set of jeans between periods, to change into a pair of jeans within 7 minutes while walking across campus to another class. That didn't make sense. I guessed it was possible, but it didn't make sense. It was like a costume got wrong during a scene change. And after that, it went all downhill. I kept seeing changes everywhere. A sign would be black in the morning but light green later at night. Or a friend would go from wearing a sweater to a t-shirt when I looked away for just a moment. You'd think that people would notice these things, but nobody did. Maybe it was the strange feeling that I got of something being off after the accident with Jake. Or perhaps you just had to be looking for them. But as I kept looking, they were everywhere. It was about a week and a half before I got a response back from the plot hole's author. He introduced himself as Dennis and apologized for being late to respond. His reason why? He had gotten caught up in observing plot holes. He was noticing the same thing I was. And this was the first time I've ever actually spoken to the guy, but the changes he described matched mine to a T. Except for one thing. After noticing a misspelled sign above a store late at night, he turned away for a moment to look back and see a shadowy black figure floating by it. It was hazy, like looking at the figure through a fog that just wasn't there, but after the being floated away, the spelling error was gone. A shiver went down my spine. That seemed too close to whatever I might have glimpsed at the house. I hadn't seen it full on yet, but then now I knew what I was looking for. I wish I hadn't. It wasn't long before I began to see them. You had to look at just the right moment, I found. When it seemed like nobody was watching or paying attention to that little error you just noticed. Then you could make it out. The shadowy haze of a being, seemingly dressed in a long black robe with a hood, messing with it until it changed. I saw one fade my friend's t-shirt into a jacket shirt set on a cold day in class. And I saw another change an entire stack of books at the library into a completely different set before they were picked up by a student. Nobody noticed them, just like the holes. It was like you had to be on that wavelength to notice. I'd been conversing with Dennis a bit online, and he agreed with that idea. It seemed like you had to notice one to start seeing the others. If you could brush it off, then your life would go on. But if you were the curious sort, then you were like us, and you'd just keep seeing them all the time. I was starting to go crazy. I couldn't say anything to anyone, and Jake kept bothering me about why we never hung out anymore. I just couldn't look at him. He wasn't natural, but I realized it wasn't him. It was those things that brought him back. Maybe he had some destiny or something, but I had no idea. Things took another turn when I was having a Skype conversation with Dennis. He asked if they'd noticed me yet. I told him no, and then he got quiet for a long time. And after some bugging, he finally responded and told me that one of his friends that was helping him look into this occurrence was gone. Nobody seemed to remember his existence. When he went over to his friend's house, Dennis found it relatively neat, save for a few items strewn about. But as he explored, the belongings that were out of place began to find themselves back in their positions. Dennis was sure that it was one of those creatures behind it, and he confirmed his suspicions when he saw one putting a book back that had been thrown on the floor. And then it turned and looked at him. The two stared for a long time, the creature gazing at Dennis while he looked into a blank nothingness that was its face, the dark hood covering what might have lurked beneath. And then I left. It turned and seemed to float away right through one of the walls. That seemed to be the last thing out of place then. The house looked like nothing had ever happened in it. And then Dennis began to notice something else. There were no pictures or objects identifying an owner. Unless you were that much of a hermit, you had at least an old family picture of parents or something. Or maybe even some mail with your name on it. But nothing. It was like nobody had ever lived in this fully furnished home. At this point, I began to worry. Dennis's friend had gone missing and nobody knew of his existence. I started putting the pieces together then. If these creatures could bring someone back from the dead, they could easily get rid of someone, right? This meant I was in danger. After that, I stopped. I was out. I ignored Dennis's messages. I tried to ignore all the holes I constantly noticed. Did my best to ignore those shadow creatures when I caught them. I even tried spending more time with Jake. But every time we were together, it was like looking at the face of a lie. And looking at him just made me think of those creatures. I imagined one pulling him up from that debris, slipping that board through and out his body, knitting up his wounds like nothing had happened. I did my best to look past it all. Dennis was hard to ignore, however. He just kept tracking me down. I'd block him from my email and messengers, but he'd start making new accounts to talk, to send me more messages. And he seemed to be sending more and more as days went on. Finally, one day, I received an email from a new account that was clearly Dennis. I was about to delete it and block him again, but the subject chilled me to the bone. They're after me. Get on Skype. I need help. I didn't know what to do. If Dennis was in trouble from these things, then I had to help. I couldn't just leave him. But after him, they might turn their sights on me. I had to help. I wasn't just gonna leave him hanging, especially if he was in danger. I logged into Skype, added his new account, and immediately got a video chat request. Dennis was in his apartment with the lights off, and he looked terrified. What's going on? I asked as I leaned in. They've been following me around, he spoke, his voice an exasperated whisper. More and more of them keep coming around, and not just to fill in the holes. They're watching me. Are you sure? In response, he lifts up his laptop and carried it out to what looked to be the kitchen. He sat it down in front of a window and drew back the curtain. I couldn't make out anything until he turned on the light. My heart stopped. I'd only seen one of them at a time. Maybe even two if something was a particularly big change. But there were at least 3 or 4 behind that window, just staring in with those empty, hooded faces. He quickly flicked off the light and turned the laptop back towards him. Do you see? I don't know what to do. I don't want to end up like Jerry. Tell me what to do. He was getting more and more anxious. I had no idea what to tell him. I didn't know what these things were. I didn't know what they wanted. I didn't know what they wanted or how to stop them. I opened my mouth, but I couldn't form the words that he needed to hear. As I stammered, looking for the words to say, I saw them slip into the background behind him. Through a freaking wall with a cabinet. Dennis, I yelled, behind you. He turned as the first approached. God, there were so many slipping in now. 3, then 4, then 5. He never stood a chance. The first reached forward with an inky arm and shoved it straight through his chest. There wasn't any blood, or even a sound save for Dennis's terrified scream. He began to writhe, grasping at his chest as the creature held him there by, I don't even know what. His spine, his heart. Hell, it could have been his very soul for all I know. Then the others were on top of him. They fell onto him like a dark dog pile, consuming him in their dark presence. I couldn't scream. I couldn't look away. I just watched as he faded from view, as those creatures piled onto him. Then slowly, ever so slowly, they backed away. Dennis was gone. I bit back the tears as I saw the empty space he had been in. I knew what happened. He was gone. Erased. Nobody would ever remember him. He was a hole that had to be filled and taken care of. Then their attention turned to the computer. To me. My eyes widened as realization hit me. I was another hole. I was an issue in their grand scheme. A thorn that had to be plucked. A part that drew too much attention to the inaccuracies of this world they were trying to design. And I had to be taken care of. I didn't even bother to turn off the computer. I just stood and turned only to find myself face to face with a horde of them. In my own house. In my own room. My back went to my desk as one shadowy figure glided to me. Its arm rose and I could almost make out the tendrils of its foggy black cloak and the individual digits of its dark fingers. I couldn't move. I was frozen, and then it struck. I didn't physically feel the hand shove into my chest, but I felt it somewhere deeper, like it was grabbing an intimate part of my being. I felt violated, exposed, and most of all, completely terrified. I screamed as it began to squeeze. It hurt. It hurt so fucking much. My vision blurred, but I could see the others move around me. They filled in a circle around my body regardless if there was something in their way or not. They just glided through it like those things weren't there. And then they fell upon me. Black hit me from every side. I screamed, but no sound came out. I could feel that hand reaching back, pulling something so personal to me away. My body felt limp. Then I started to feel nothing. It inched along my limbs slowly, turning the feeling of cold, pain, terror into absolute nothing. I could only describe it as a feeling of being erased. There was feeling, strong feeling, and then nothing. It slowly inched along, rising up my arms and legs until it consumed my whole being. The pain faded. Along with it, the sounds of the world and my vision before me. Soon, nothing was before me but pure blackness. I was gone. I knew it. I was dead. Or worse, I didn't exist any longer. Stretched out before me was nothing but darkness. I tried to call out into the void, to claw my way forward, but I couldn't move a limb. More like I didn't have a limb to move or a mouth to scream. I was just an essence, a leftover thing floating in an endless void of nothing. I'm still there, in pure nothingness. I can't move, or rather, I don't think I have anything left to move. It's gone. Every part of me is gone. I wonder what happens now. I wonder what Jake's destiny was. I also begin to wonder if this was death, or something worse. A punishment for sticking my nose in places it shouldn't be. Is this death, or pure erasure? I'm sure that Dennis is feeling the same things that I'm feeling. And I can almost imagine him, too, floating in the same void. Maybe one day we'll meet each other. It's a hope that I try to keep alive. It keeps me sane that I might, one day, not be alone here. And that's the end of my story. I wish it was better. I wish I could say I fought back and saved myself. And at least say that I was on the run. But some plots don't have happy endings. However, I'm sure I've left you wondering one final thing. If I'm dead, or erased. then how could I have recorded this? Well, my poor friend, you've just discovered your first plot hole.